Ladies and gentlemen, we have made it. We are officially all the way back. We are into the 2026 baseball season. That's great for baseball fans, and that is so far predictably terrible for Twins fans. So, Matt, give us your feelings on these first few games.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pretty frustrating first few games. I mean, I think this team all along was kind of expected to be frustrating, but I mean, 1-3 start to begin the year. I think it's hard to watch just because the team has shortcomings in all of the areas that we expected them to have shortcomings, and it just feels like the slow start and kind of the way they've struggled has been really predictable.
Yeah, I mean, my big takeaway, and granted, it's only one game. Everybody knows not to overreact to opening day. But I just thought it was really picture perfect that Joe Ryan threw 5 1/3 innings where he did not allow a runner to reach second base. And then the bullpen gave up 2 runs over, what would that be, 3 2/3, which is all right, still not a terrible performance. And then the offense went 1 for 12 with runners in scoring position. And our lone run of the day was a Byron Buxton triple followed by a Keishel sac fly. It just felt extremely emblematic of everything we were worried about happening this season. And through 4 games, that's what we've seen.
Yeah, we'll say like if we're looking for a bright spot, I think the bullpen has been better than expected. I mean, with the normal caveat that we're only 4 games in, but so far, outside of the game one kind of Justin Topa struggle a little bit, the bullpen's been pretty lights out. I mean, obviously, Mick Abel wasn't good in a relief role, but that's really a starting pitching issue more than it is a relief issue. And so I don't know. It's not operating on a whole large sample size. There's not a whole lot of projections that you can do for the rest of the year based on, 3 or 4 games. But so far, I think the bullpen's looked surprisingly competent.
Yeah, I would say my biggest bright spot there is Anthony Banda kind of seems to be the high leverage lefty, and more importantly, the Twins seem comfortable throwing him against right-handers early, and it has worked early. So I mean, I wouldn't say this bullpen has been airtight. There's been, I think, a lot of traffic and a lot of jams, but the big thing is not a lot of runs scored yet. I really like that Derek Shelton has been pushing buttons mid inning, getting guys in and out as they get into traffic, and not getting so fixated on guys finishing innings. I think sometimes that was an issue that I felt Rocco Baldelli got himself into. So while it's still scary, I will take this level of performance out of the bullpen all season.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to really say that 4 games of bullpen performance really matters all that much, but it's been good so far. I'm sure we're gonna get to midseason, and a pitching change or two will blow up in Shelton's face, and we'll think kind of the opposite. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast with relievers, and especially a group of journeymen, like not real established relievers like the Twins have. It's bound to look a little bit less pretty at some point this season. But yeah, happy so far. Otherwise, like the rotation has been very good as well. Like you said, Joe Ryan obviously had a fabulous opening day start. His velocity was back up, where we expected it to be. I think the big interesting thing out of that outing was just how often Joe Ryan threw his curveball. It was much more frequent than he had last year. Let me pull up his pitch mix. Yeah, he threw 16% curveballs. He got quite a few swings and misses, 4 whiffs on the pitch, a total CSW of 50%. It was a really effective pitch for him. And we saw him kind of spread out his arsenal a lot. He threw 6 different pitches at least 6 times. So I think, for a guy who's relied a lot on his fastball throughout his career, it's cool to see him mixing up a bunch of pitches. He's a guy that's added pitches to his repertoire over the last few years, but he's just continuing to do so.
Especially with it being such a big put away pitch like a curveball. I mean, obviously, a 25% whiff rate is pretty gnarly on any off speed pitch because, I mean, his fastball is nice. It's a great setup pitch. I don't really know how much it plays as a put away pitch. It's definitely better than your average fastball. But I do like to see him, I mean, rounding out his arsenal because I do think it's not unreasonable to say he's at the caliber of pitcher where at this point he can afford to start tinkering with new stuff, and he's already pretty set on his current stuff. Another guy that I was ended up being really excited about was Taj Bradley. It was a little scary in that first inning of his start, but after that, he really rallied to have maybe even a better start than Joe Ryan.
Yeah, just one more thing on Ryan. I mean, we've already seen him tinker with this stuff in the past. He pretty much swapped out his slider for a sweeper. He ditched his changeup entirely to add a splitter, and then now he's mixing in a curveball. Last year, he started throwing a sinker more often. So he's, mixed it up before. And I will say his velocity was really good early in the outing, but by the sixth inning, he was down to 91.8 on his fastball after starting out averaging 95.2 in the first. Pretty normal for guys to lose some velo throughout an outing, but it really dropped off quickly at the end. Yeah, at that point, he was at 80, 90 pitches in his first outing of the year, so I'm not super concerned about it. But one thing to watch for there. And yeah, like you said, Taj Bradley he was great in his first outing. He kind of struggled to locate the secondaries, especially in the first inning. But I thought the four seamer was electric. He did a great job of locating it to the arm side. He was just kind of painting, that inside corner to right-handed batters away from lefties with velocity all day. He was getting swings and misses and a lot of called strikes. So I thought that was great. And then, he got a lot of swings and misses on his off-speed stuff. He just has to throw it in the zone a little bit more frequently.
It was that velo that really popped for me. I know we've been kind of spoiled in the last few years having Duran averaging like 103 on his fastball, 102. We do have to take a step back and remember that, especially for starters, that's not common. I believe I saw Aaron Gleeman talk about Taj Bradley with his 100-mile-an-hour fastball in the fourth or wherever it was, throwing the hardest pitch and becoming the first Twin starting pitcher to hit 100 on the radar gun in his career. That's just going to play. It might not lead to a particularly long career. He will eventually need to start locating those off-speed pitches, but if he can pump 100 at the top end of his fastball and average into a 97-ish, 98-ish mile per hour gap, which is where his fastball was sitting in his first start, I think he can afford to be a little loose and a little sloppy with those off-speed pitches for now because he just has the overwhelming power to get it done anyway.
Yeah, I mean, throughout his outing, he averaged 97.4. So, like you said, that will play, especially for a starting pitcher. Kind of interestingly, he held his velocity really well throughout his start. He started off the first inning averaging 97.2, and then his last inning of work in the fifth, he averaged 97.1. And he really ramped it up when he got into trouble in the third inning. He averaged almost 99 miles per hour on his fastball that inning. And so I thought that was really impressive. I thought the thing that really encapsulated his start the best was when he, dotted 100 on the corner against Adley Rutschman. It's like, man, that's the guy we traded for. That's what the Twins saw in him, and that's what we're, hoping he can do more consistently. I do think it was interesting how frequently he threw his splitter. He's a guy that threw a lot of splitters when he first came up. It was his go-to secondary pitch, and he got a lot of swings and misses on it. And then that's really what the main thing in his decline has been the last couple years, is just not having that splitter for a put-away pitch to both-handed batters. And what was that, on Saturday? Yeah, Saturday, Taj Bradley threw 27 splitters, and he got 11 swings on them and generated 7 whiffs. So 64% whiff rate on his splitter. It'll definitely play. It averaged over 91 miles an hour. And so, I mean, if he can just, get the splitter or the cutter in the zone more frequently to have a secondary pitch that he can steal strikes with, he certainly can, also get some swings and misses. And it's looking like a pretty good profile.
Yeah, and I mean that was something that they were even picking up on a little bit in the broadcast throughout the Orioles series. They specifically were talking about how Gunnar Henderson really could not just make heads or tails of that splitter, but it's certainly something that I think he can also play off his velocity in the sense that as the velocity continues to play up, I think that splitter is going to be more deceiving just because, I mean, sometimes when you have a hard throwing guy like Taj Bradley, you can struggle a little bit with your off speed. not even being quite off speed enough. I do like where the splitter has been sitting. I think that if he can continue to pump this velocity, that's also going to help differentiate the pitches and really keep hitters just more off balance on it.
Yeah, I also want to point out that like it's not just the velocity for Bradley on the fastball. On Saturday, he averaged 19 inches of induced vertical break, and I don't have the numbers in front of me adjusting for arm slot to really know, what the expected number of vertical break is. But just like looking at raw induced vertical break, that's a really good fastball. He's getting a ton of ride in the zone. It's the type of pitch that we'd expect to play well at the top of the zone. Again, not knowing his release point or his arm angle, it's a little bit tough to say, exactly how good that break is. But just looking at the raw numbers, it looks pretty solid. One guy that I think did not look great in our first turn through the rotation was Bailey Ober. We've talked all offseason about Ober really struggling to get back to his velocity they showed early in his career, and that continued on Sunday. He averaged 89.8 on his fastball, and I think as a good sign of where his fastball is at, he threw his changeup 7 more times than the fastball. He threw his changeup 41% of the time, and his four seamer only 29% of the time. And he did not induce a single swing and miss on the fastball.
I just don't know where you go from here with Bailey Ober. I know you had mentioned before we broke camp talking about throwing him on the injured list and, seeing if he can work through it. Clearly, I don't think he's hurt anymore. I don't think that the Twins really feel like any more rest or recovery or buildup is going to get his velocity back. It might just be gone. That's terrible to think about for a guy who is still relatively so young, a guy that the Twins believed in a lot. But clearly, it's not just a physical aspect at this point, there is a mental aspect to it. He has to know, both him and the catcher, if they're working away from the fastball that much compared to your average pitcher. It's not there. He has no confidence in it, and there's good reason for him to have no confidence in it. But this is one of those weird situations where I just don't really know what to say about it. I feel like a lot of times when you see such a sharp and sudden decline for a pitcher, you can point exactly to the when and the why. Maybe this ties in a little bit to some of the back injuries he was working through last year, which is why a lot of people thought that he had such down velos last year, and why many assumed that a full off season of healthy rest and recovery followed by a normal buildup would get him back to where he was before the injuries. And that's just not the case. So I don't know where the Twins go from here with him.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like you're definitely hoping going into the off season that he can rest, he can rehab, and get that hip back right. Um, and I think like as concerning as it is to see a major drop in velocity in 1 year, there's always the hope that it was injury related. He could work back from the injury and get back to his 2023, 2024 self. And that just didn't happen. I think at this point, it's hard to say without being Bailey Ober himself, knowing if he's still experiencing pain in that hip, if he still has some stiffness, some discomfort, if it is something that's limiting him in some way. I think we can't rule out that it could still be some sort of physical limitation, but also I think there's a pretty good chance that last year while trying to compensate for his hip injury, he developed bad habits. He's talked about this throughout camp, but I think he likely developed some bad habits, and that's part of the reason he's struggling to refine that velocity because mechanically he's just not the same pitcher that he was. And for a guy who I think Bailey Ober's 6'7" or 6'8", there's a lot of moving parts. He's a big guy. It's really hard to keep your mechanics in line and fully tuned up from start to start. And then you mix in a pretty significant injury for the entirety of a season. And I think there could be some lag effect for his mechanics getting back on track. The problem is, if you're the Twins in a team that really is living on the margins and has a pretty slim chance of contending this year, how long can you wait for him to find it again? Because if we get 10 starts into the year and Bailey Ober's still not looking great and giving up a lot of hard contact and not missing bats, you're playoff odds that were slim to begin with are probably pretty low after 10 bad starts. And B, he's probably a guy that you're non tendering at the end of the year, anyways. And so, what's the point in continuing to give him starts? So, I don't think it's to that point yet, but it's something to watch for as we get into, May and June with Ober.
And this is where the injuries earlier in camp really start to pile up. I think we always kind of knew that it was going to come into play eventually, but it's discouraging to already see after one start that we have to consider, yeah, okay, Bailey Ober just clearly does not have it right now. What do we do next? We do have Zebby Matthews waiting in the wing. I would have no issue seeing him up quickly, but I don't think that Ober has been bad enough long enough to justify that. I do agree with you that I think 10 starts is a good rough threshold before the Twins can really start to bail on Bailey Ober. And even then, it's what is the answer? If you send Bailey Ober back down to AAA, you are functionally just non-tendering him halfway through the season. You're saying we have given up on this guy. We don't believe he's ever going to rediscover the magic. And that is the scary part about guys like Bailey Ober, who were built from relatively nothing, picked out of the pile for their size by the Twins, and sculpted mechanically to become competitive throwers. It takes much less for those guys to fall off the wagon and never get back on. So I think it's just a matter of, will we even have a reasonable replacement by the time we're ready to pull him, though? Because as bad as Bailey Ober is, I would still rather keep him pitching every day than put him on the injured list and pray that more rest and recovery is going to get him right. Because at this point, it clearly won't, unless he is hiding another undisclosed injury from the team, which is something that, I mean, we've talked about it before with Joe Ryan. It happens. It shouldn't. Everybody understands. But either way, he needs to be pitching at some level, and I feel like that's just got to end up being the MLB level for this season, no matter what.
Yeah, so a couple things with Ober. One, I think his fastball velocity is definitely the big storyline, and I do think it is the limiting factor for his performance. But he's only about a mile and a half off on his fastball from his peak levels. So it's not like he's lost that much velocity. It's just that he didn't have a whole lot of velocity to lose. And so for a guy who is already averaging 91 and a half to like 92 ish on the fastball, losing a tick and a half is massive versus a guy like John Duran. We saw him lose 2 or 3 miles per hour on his fastball that never came back. He was still averaging over 100, so it didn't really matter. So I think there's some reason to believe that Bailey Ober can probably find a mile per hour at some point and hopefully regain his former form. And also, the Twins. Well, first of all, most teams aren't going to send down a pitcher of Bailey Ober's service time. He's a veteran. He's a guy that they had planned on counting on this season, and so it'd be a pretty drastic step to send him down. And also, the Twins don't have that long to make a decision on him. Bailey Ober does still have one more option remaining. However, he's already at over 4.5 years of service time. And once he hits that fifth year, he has the ability to become a free agent while retaining his salary for this year. And so I think that's an important threshold to watch for. And honestly, even if he's still not pitching well and the Twins elect to send him down, Bailey Ober still has. Let me think about it. Actually, no. It's only if they outright him off the 40-man that he would have the ability to become a free agent. I'm mistaken, but even still, I think it's unlikely that the Twins will option him, even if he does have an option remaining. Just because, like you said, I mean, he just needs to work through it on a mound, and even a guy with diminished velocity pitching in the minors, he still has the secondaries and the command to dominate minor league hitters, and I don't think we'll learn a whole lot there.
Yeah. And the other thing that isn't lost on me here is, as we've been kind of digging into these Bailey Ober issues and talking about it, these sound like very eerily similar conversations to the ones we had a bit about both Liam Hendricks and Andrew Chafin back in minor league camp, which makes more sense for those guys because they're in their mid to late 30s. They are just getting older. Their bodies simply cannot keep this up anymore. While we could believe in Bailey Ober finding a few ticks, and ultimately you are right where this team is bad. It doesn't really matter if Bailey Ober is bad for us or for AAA. We're going to be bad even if we get him off of the roster. So really, for a lot of reasons, but especially just how the team treats their veteran players and the message it would send if they do send Bailey Ober down. I I guess it was more of a rhetorical question. We know we're gonna have to see him all year, but at what point does that become? At what point, I guess, is my new question. Then does he become a non-priority in the rotation? At what point is he the one coming in to do mop-up relief duties? Well, not mop-up, but relief duties like McAble did earlier this week. At what point is he the one having his starts jumped for guys like Zebby Matthews or David Festa if he comes back and he's healthy and he's pitching, or if they bring up Kendry Rojas or Connor Prelip? At what point is Bailey Ober no longer a priority in this rotation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it all depends on where the Twins are competitively. If we get to June and the Twins are hanging around 500 on the fringes of the wild card race, I think it becomes a lot easier to be like, this guy's clearly hurting our playoff odds. It's time to prioritize other arms. But if we get to the same spot and the Twins are, below 500 and it's looking like another losing season, I think the Twins will just keep riding him out because at this point, the money's already spent on him. You need depth arms in any season, especially in a losing season. If he would give them, just a reliable innings eater, even if he's not any good, he can just go out there and eat it for 5 or 6 innings. It allows you to keep other guys in the minors if you want to. And he just gives you some coverage. And then, there's always the hope that, maybe in August he figures out his mechanics and he's good down the stretch. And then maybe he's worth tendering a contract to. But I guess like as a whole, if they're good and Bailey Ober's not, they'll probably, cut bait and go to some higher upside options. And if they're bad and Bailey Ober's bad, who cares? He's just going to keep pitching.
I will also point out we've been talking about the possibility of DFAing him or non-tendering him this offseason. There is still a semblance of value to what we call the Chad innings eater. If you're baseball nerds like me and Matt, you definitely know about the archetype of the Chad innings eater. I think it really came to prominence, at least when I started recognizing it, with Jordan Lyles on the Royals. But there is some value to having a guy that, will go out there every fifth day, take the ball for 5 to 6 innings, and play major league quality baseball. It might not be good. He may be like on the bottom end of replacement level, but just having a seasoned veteran that you can rely on to get outs is valuable because there's so many outs to be gotten every season where even if Bailey Ober pitches to another high fours ERA, his strikeout rate dips, his velocity never goes above 90, averaging on his fastball all year. I bet there's still a taker out there. Maybe not many. It's not for a lot of value, but you could probably still deal him because at some point, just being a healthy every fifth day option is still valuable.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would push back on there is that Bailey Ober has very rarely been available every fifth day in his career. Throughout the minors, he was hurt all the time. He missed a ton of time at every stop. He came into the league in 2021, and combined in the majors and minors, he threw 108 innings that year. In 2022, between the big leagues and the minors, he threw only 72 innings. And then, he was healthy ish in 2023, throwing, I guess, 163 innings or 167 innings, sorry. And then 2024, he threw another 178 before dropping off a little bit last year. But I mean, yeah, a team will take a chance on a guy who's at that point, he'd be 31. He has a track record of success, and he'd probably only be making 7 million, 8 million in arbitration. But yeah,
He's also only got what, 1 year of ARB left, or is it 2?
He has 1 year after this.
So it's pretty inconsequential in the long run, unless your salary is getting slashed by 30 million every year. But
yeah, that's fair. Another guy that I wanted to talk about was McAble. So he came in a piggyback sort of role with Bailey Ober on Sunday. And I was really surprised by the pitch mix that we saw from Abel. I wrote a whole long thing on Twitter this offseason about how I don't think Mick Abel has bad stuff or bad command. I think he's just throwing the wrong pitches. He needs to prioritize his better pitches, mix up his pitch mix. And I think all the weapons are there for him to be an effective starting pitcher. And then he came out season debut and he did pretty much the opposite of everything I said. So he threw his four seamer 52% of the time in his outing. He was pretty good with the four seamer. He generated a 32% whiff rate and a 36% CSW. For a pitch that was carrying the bulk of the load, he got really good results on it. And I think that's what we saw a lot in his performance last year. The four seamer's good, and the four seamer is able to get strikes and just carry the arsenal in general. The secondaries, I think, was the big problem. And I think sort of the reason for that is he threw a lot of sliders and changeups. And if you read my article over the winter, you'd know his slider and changeup are not particularly good. He can throw them in the zone, yes. Can he throw them in the zone without them being hit? No. So you could tell early in his outing, he threw a bunch of sweepers. They weren't landing in the zone. They had good movement. They looked great, but they weren't landing. And then he switched to a slider, which is able to throw over the plate more, but it just wasn't getting swings and misses. He wasn't able to use it to put away batters. And then he started to just resort to the changeup, which again is kind of a show me pitch that he likes to throw to lefties, but it became his primary off speed offering to lefties, throwing it 52% of the time to left handed batters. I think that's really problematic for just a bad pitch. And I mean, the pitch that I was most bullish on for Mick Abel was his curveball, which he pretty much scrapped, and he only threw it 6% of the time yesterday, down from 21% last year. And so just overall, very confusing. He had a hard time getting anyone to chase or swing and miss on any of his off-speed pitches. He had a hard time throwing anything but the changeup for a strike, and it was just very confusing. Like, he wasn't throwing the pitches that had the potential to put away a batter. He was shying away from those in favor of ones that he could throw in the zone, and those ones were then just getting hit.
Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm happy with the Mick Abel performance, but what I will say is he looked like a starting pitcher who was relatively confused and unprepared to pitch a long relief role, because he is a starting pitcher who doesn't really have a ton of long relief experience. I understand that this isn't your traditional long relief in the sense that it sounds like the Twins had been planning this for a while, so Mick Abel knew to kind of build up for this day. And in a lot of ways, he could treat it like a traditional start because they did let him come in on a clean inning. But at the end of the day, I'm still just not a fan. I like that he's getting opportunities. I think that this is kind of a show me type of attitude that the Twins are treating him with. And I think there's a very real chance that could have played a factor in how he was pitching, because he defaulted to what he knows and what he can get in the zone, which is frustrating, but it's a little understandable when you barely made the roster. A lot of people expected and projected him to not even get a starting spot out of the gate, and now he's being very clearly keyed in as the fifth starter because he was the only one of the four to not get to start a game through our first four stretch.
Okay,
And
I disagree though, because this is like what every team does with their fifth starter. Like, especially in an early stretch in the season when the Twins had 2 off days within a 4-day stretch, like, it was just implausible to keep everyone throwing every fifth day. And I will say he did get prepared for this in spring training. His last spring training outing, they brought him in the 5th inning, just like they did for this start. So he knew, a couple weeks in advance that this was going to be the plan, and he'd done it before. And also they told him, like, going into the start, you're coming in the 5th. So he was able to do his whole pre-start routine. He was able to, throw in the bullpen and do everything that he normally would, with a plan to throw the 5th inning instead of the first inning. And then they gave him a normal pitch count, once he got into the game. So I don't think it was totally out of left field, and I think it was well prepared. Yeah, I guess, like, for a guy who's been a career long starting pitcher, I could see where there'd be some discomfort there. But I definitely don't think the Twins were treating him, any different from any other starter in any other year.
No, and that's like I said, it's a bit of flimsy excuses to be making. I am definitely being just maybe a little overprotective of McAble. Also, as a McAble fantasy owner, I'm not a fan that this wasn't really clued in beforehand. Ended up saving me because it would have been a terrible performance. But outside of that, I guess more my point is just that I'm not super surprised. I don't think that he really showed anything different from spring training when he was dominant the entire spring training. I really don't see as much, call for real concern as we saw with Bailey Ober in his first start. I am fine just chalking this up as young pitcher gets weird first opportunity of the season and regresses back to what's comfortable. I do think that if this continues, the Twins are going to make more of a point of contention to get him off of those kind of crutches and into a deeper pitch mix. I think a lot of times when you're a younger batter, younger pitcher, it can be as simple as locking into, okay, I know that I'm going to throw primarily a changeup to lefties because that's a lefty pitch, and I'm going to throw primarily sliders to righties because that's a righty pitch, and just kind of abandon everything else. I think that the ability to pick up on what is working and what is feeling good mid start or mid outing and really ride that is something that takes time and experience. So for all of those things above, and still I think it was a little off-putting, even if it's understanding to put him in the situation he did. I'm not that worried about the McCable start.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be fine. I have confidence that the staff will work out the secondary pitches. But yeah, I agree. It's not the pitch mix I was hoping for. But I mean, the four seamer was good enough to keep him in the outing just on its own. And so I guess that's, something to be happy with. But everything else in the arsenal looked a lot like it did last year. He was struggling to throw it for a strike. He was struggling to get whiffs on it. The secondaries are very much a work in progress. I will say the sweeper, while it wasn't near the zone a whole lot, I thought it looked good just to the eye test. And I think that was the pitch that I was most interested coming into the year to see. And it looked solid. He got 18 inches of break on average on that sweeper, which is pretty solid. And I think that could be an exciting pitch for him, especially against right-handed hitters. But yeah, I mean that changeup also, I don't love it, and I don't think it's necessarily sustainable. But it did have 57% whiff rate on only 12 pitches thrown, and so there's reason to have some confidence in the changeup maybe, but yeah, overall, just kind of a meh outing.
Well, if we are talking about Sunday's game right now, we should talk about the ninth inning. Specifically, I want to talk about Derek Shelton's ejection. I will be so straight up. I was rooting for this. As soon as I saw the entire ordeal go down, and having reviewed it, the Orioles are right. Ryan Helsley did challenge right away. It was tough to see. It was, I think, a little bit just jarring because even though pitchers are allowed to challenge, I think every team has told their pitcher they're not allowed to challenge and they have to let the catcher handle that. So I can understand how it was all missed, but this also was like such a classic setup for a manager to get ejected that I just wanted to see Derek Shelton come alive and get in an umpire's face for his guys, because even if the eventual correct call was made, Derek Shelton, I think, was also right to be pretty upset with the umpire.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean, I don't know that's necessarily that he was really upset about the moment. Yes, it's I think it was handled a little poorly and it was a bit delayed. But I think he's probably more upset about how his team played. This is a very winnable game for the Twins. They got up to a 4-run lead early. They held it for a while. They were in a really good spot. And then they just kind of played sloppy in the second half of the game. Both Buxton and Josh Bell got thrown out on the bases. I thought the defense was pretty rough. And it just overall was not a great game. They also just walked a bunch of guys, and that was a problem. I think it was just kind of a piss poor performance from the team in a game that they really should have won. And I think more than anything, that contributed to Shelton's frustration and then eventual ejection.
No, there is definitely building frustration throughout the game. If we want to talk about frustration, we can also talk about Matt Wallner's challenge on that 3-2 pitch. I believe that was the inning before in the eighth where the bases were loaded. I mean, I have seen multiple takes on it. I do believe that it was more than anything a frustration challenge. I think he probably knew it was a strike and knew there was just nothing he could do about that pitch, and he was just frustrated. I have also seen multiple people online say, and I agree, I think you just have to challenge that call. In that big of a situation, that late in the game, anything that could be conceivably borderline, I think should be challenged just because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, but it wasn't conceivably borderline. It was very much a strike, and everyone knew it, and Wallner knew it. You could see he like tapped his helmet and then immediately regretted it because everyone in the ballpark knew it was a strike. And so it was really just him throwing away our last challenge out of frustration. And I don't think it really mattered in the end, but I think that was probably not the right call and probably something he regretted immediately after.
I do definitely want to keep track, if not for the whole MLB, at least for the Twins this season. I don't think this whole frustration challenge is going to be foreign concept. My bet would be that a lot of guys are going to get really worked up at the plate, and throughout the entire season, even after they're well versed in these challenges and they know better, there's still going to be so many heat of the moment challenges that end up exactly like Matt Wallner's. So I actually want to place bets on this. Who do you think will lead the Twins in frustration slash just straight up stupid challenges?
Uh, I bet it's Royce Lewis. He's a very emotional player. He rides the highs, he falls in the lows, and I bet he has some rough challenges this year.
It feels like a little bit of low hanging fruit to take Matt Wallner because he already has one on the board. But I do also think that he is the prototypical guy in the sense that he's a good hitter, but he also has known flaws. They're not gaping, glaring flaws, which is why he's able to continue to be a good hitter. But he has struggled with pretty much any heat inside on him, especially up and in on him. So it was not super surprising to see Helsley dot up a fastball on him like that. And I do think as a hitter, when you know that you're good but not great, and you can even see exactly where you need to improve and what you're struggling with, that is going to lead to a lot more frustrating challenges, exactly like we saw already. So I think I'll throw my hat behind Matt Wallner.
Yeah, I will say the Twins at peak in that game in I think it's the fourth inning. They were up to a 90% win probability after the Josh Bell double, and then that immediately dropped back down after he ran into a double play inexplicably. So, I mean, I think the base running is a big thing to take away from this game. You know, Buxton got a little over aggressive, got thrown out at second. Josh Bell was trying to run on a ball hit on the ground in front of him. Every little league coach was screaming at their TV during that, especially for a guy like Josh Bell who just does not have the speed and athleticism to outrun the ball in front of him. It made no sense. I like that they were trying to be aggressive, but I think that's something they need to clean up. And I think also, like, while we're talking about the offense, we really need to talk about this lineup construction and just kind of how they've arranged all of their guys. Through our first four games, we've seen the Twins operate with a strict platoon at first base between Victor Caratini and Kody Clemens. And that means that our left field platoon has turned into Trevor Larnach and Austin Martin. I think we predicted the Austin Martin part of that. Trevor Larnach playing the field regularly. It's a little bit out of left field, pun intended. And Josh Bell's been the everyday DH. I think that's led to some really questionable decisions. Namely, I don't think Kody Clemens deserves a spot, in the lineup every game against righties, and I certainly don't think he should be leading off against righties. And then I also think that Larnach's defense and left has left a lot to be desired, and it was pretty apparent in this this Orioles series. There's a couple balls I think he really should have gotten to, and most left fielders come up with. One of which, in one of those big innings for the Orioles, he let a ball drop down the line. somehow Royce Lewis and Brooks Lee got closer to this ball than Larnach did, and it was like pretty close to the corner. Like it was out there. And I think that just points out how bad of a fielder Trevor Larnach was. And I don't know about you guys, but I was screaming at my TV, like, I swear to just put James Outman out there. Like has to be better. Even if they're both bad hitters, Outman catches that ball easily. That's a long way of just saying I still don't think Trevor Larnach belongs in this roster. I still think he's not a good player. But it was really frustrating to see like even a deeply flawed player, the rest of the roster construction has led to the situation where he's playing the position he's least equipped to play, and it's hurting the team. And it's like everyone with a brain saw this coming 6 months ago. What are we doing here?
Yeah, and what really kills me, because I was texting you on the opposite end of this, is they do still did end up getting James Outman into the game as a defensive replacement, albeit later into the game than they probably should have, and that resulted in James Outman having two terribly important at bats. The first one ended up okay. It was in the eighth inning when we'd started out with the Bell walk and Caratini single. First and second no outs. When you're down three, you knew you really needed to make something happen, and to his credit, he did draw a four pitch walk. I'm not going to exactly say that's a terribly impressive at bat, but it is a productive one. And then once again, with two outs in the ninth inning, representing the game winning run, we saw James Outman walk to the plate. And I asked myself, how in the world did we already end up in this situation where we're in the bottom of the ninth with the winning run at the plate and it has to be James goddamn Outman? I don't want that man hitting ever. I don't like that man on this roster. We have a lot of issues. I get that we've already been really beating the dead horse on Larnach and Kody Clemens, and I don't agree with those decisions either. But those are ones that are much more long term and deeply rooted in what the Twins are doing. James Outman just does not belong here. There's no excuse for him over Alan Roden on this roster anymore.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue, I agree that I'm not the biggest James Outman fan, but he is center field capable. He is a good pinch runner, and there's some reason to believe in the bat, even if it seems a little far fetched to think that he can get back to his rookie status when he hit 23 home runs in 2023. I think the bigger thing, especially for how they're deploying them, that frustrates me is Trevor Larnach over Alan Roden, because Alan Roden as the strong side of a platoon in left field is what we were pounding the table for all offseason, all spring training. It fits his skill set really well as a strong defensive corner outfield, as a guy who hits right-handed pitching on a very high level, and as a guy who's nothing left to prove in AAA. And I think choosing to use Trevor Larnach, is going to be mediocre at the plate and bad defensively in that role, and pay him $4.5 million to do so is just a horrible choice and allocation of resources. And again, it's what we said all off season. It's nothing different than what we were saying, in November and December. But it just really illustrates how bad of a decision it was to tender Trevor Larnach. And I'll go out on a limb here and say I don't think Trevor Larnach makes it through the full season on this roster, because we're talking about how kind of indefensible it is to have Larnach on this roster with Alan Roden in AAA. Think about how much worse it'll be when we get to June, July, and we have, hopefully, if they're healthy, Emmanuel Rodriguez, Walker Jenkins, and Gabby Gonzalez pounding on the door to come up. At that point, you have a million left-hand corner outfielders. They were all probably better than Trevor Larnach on opening day. They all are controlled for 4 or 5 more years than Trevor Larnach. Why would we give him any playing time? And honestly, I don't think Trevor Larnach has any trade value, especially not for his salary. And so I think we could see it get to June, and unless Trevor Larnach's really hitting, the Twins just DFA him and call up one of the young guys, because at this point, there's no hope in Trevor Larnach being a long-term piece. There's hope for these other guys, and you just have to play them.
I don't disagree with any of that, but if I'm going to sit back and look at what the Twins have been doing, how they have approached this whole situation, and what I think do needs to happen, I sneaky think the first domino to fall could be Kody Clemens. I think he's a lot more on the fritz and has even less of a fit here. And to a lesser degree, this is also about Josh Bell because right now the Twins don't really appear like they want to play Josh Bell at first base at all. I think if Josh Bell hits well or hits even just what he's done over the last 2 to 3 years, what we signed him to do, and Kody Clemens continues to just be atrocious, especially at the top of our lineup, they're going to run out of patience really quickly. I think the whole second base utilityness of Kody Clemens is extremely overrated. The Twins let Tristan Gray start at shortstop on Sunday. They've rested any questions about how comfortable they are with him defensively. So at this point, we can square up the Tristan Gray, Luke Keeschel, Brooks Lee trio as covering the two middle infield spots every day. That means you don't really need to consider Kody Clemens in your second base rotation. And if he's not doing anything but playing first base in a platoon role, then he has to hit the absolute lights out of the ball to provide any value. So I weirdly still think that the first domino to fall could be Kody Clemens. I think it could be by the end of the month. If he is cold all month and Josh Bell looks fine, I would not be shocked to see them finally, at the very least, pull the trigger, make Larnach the everyday DH, sit him against lefties, let Josh Bell play DH then, have Victor Caratini be your primary first baseman, and get Alan Roden on this roster. It does leave us thin at first base, but I think Josh Bell is capable of playing first base for that long, and I see no reason not to let him try if Kody Clemens is going to hit like this.
Yeah, I will say a couple things on Clemens. I agree that he's not a good hitter, and he's definitely not suited to be a leadoff hitter. For his career, he has a 262 on base percentage, which is horrendous. It's really bad, especially for a bat first position like first base. Even last year, in a career year for the Twins, he had a 281 on base percentage. He's a guy that you hope to not have in your starting lineup, A. And if he is, you probably want him hitting seventh or eighth. He can pop 15, 20 homers at the bottom of your lineup. You don't have to rely on him. You're not trying to get him on base for other guys. He can just be, a cheap source of power later on. Hitting him leadoff is nonsensical, especially when you have Luke Keeschel, who's a tailor-made leadoff man. And I get that the rest of the lineup is pretty shallow, in part because they're playing Kody Clemens at first base. But there's other options, and giving Kody Clemens the most plate appearances on the team against right-handed pitching makes zero sense at all. And maybe that points to the Twins not being comfortable with Josh Bell playing first base 2/3 of the time. I think if that's the case, why did you sign Josh Bell? But yeah, I could see a situation where the Twins, a month and a half down the line, say it's untenable to have both Kody Clemens and Trevor Larnach in a platoon role. We can cut bait on one of these guys, shuffle the pieces, get Alan Roden into the lineup, and that makes some sense. But at least initially, Kody Clemens is playing every day against right-handed pitching and leading off. And Trevor Larnach is batting seventh against right-handed pitchers. It's clear which one they value and trust more. And okay, again, not to beat the dead horse, but Kody Clemens was acquired for cash considerations as an emergency option in the middle of the year, and then was still a below average hitter the rest of the season. And the Twins gave Trevor Larnach $4.5 million to play the most redundant position on their roster. You trust Kody Clemens more, and Kody Clemens was available for nothing in the middle of the season when everyone hoards depth. And now you're like, yeah, but we gotta give this guy he was a first round pick 7 years ago. Who cares when he was picked? That was the same year that that's the same year that Josh Rosen was a first round pick in the NFL. It took 1 year for the Cardinals to cut bait on him, and the Twins are on year 8 of trotting out Trevor Larnach and being like, maybe this is the year he hits for power. He's not going to hit for power this year. I guarantee he's going to be a league average bat with a terrible glove. You're putting him in left field every day. What are we doing here?
I have a very important question for you right now, Matt. If the Twins do cut bait from Kody Clemens, they're going to need a new everyday leadoff hitter against right-handed hitters. Would you rather see Kody Clemens or Trevor Larnach be the everyday right-handed pitcher leadoff hitter?
Trevor Larnach, and it's not close. Kody Clemens has a 262 on base percentage for his career. Let me pull up Trevor Larnach because it's definitely higher. So it's
especially if we're
260.
just looking at righties.
Yeah, so it's 262 for Clemens and is 324 for Larnach. So not close. I'm taking Larnach in the leadoff spot between the two of them.
And if we can already say that, I do think it just points to how nonsensical this entire thing has been. It caught everybody by surprise. Aaron Gleeman and Dan Hayes certainly had a lot of fun with it at the Athletic, and for good reason, because if anybody is confused about how we got here, so are we. Kody Clemens has never led off in his life. He's never been a leadoff hitter at any level. Like, as far as we know, we're talking he hasn't even led off for his high school varsity team. So what he's doing is unprecedented in both how bad and how stupid it is going. And that's why I do still have faith in him being the first guy to fall out of favor and off of this roster in 26.
Just for context, by the way, since we're talking about left-handed hitters who could potentially fill a leadoff role, Alan Roden, A, good defender, B, steals bases, C, in 2023 in the minors, he had a 430 on base. In 2024, he had a 391 on base. And last year in AAA, he had a 423 on base. He's an on base machine. He hits left handed, and he's a better defender than either of them. What are we doing here?
Part of me almost wishes they didn't play him in the back half of last year, because the only like semi tangible logical thing I could even see the Twins grasping at and justifying this decision is, oh well, Alan Roden really struggled at the back half last year. I'm like, yeah, so did Kody Clemens. So is Kody Clemens right now. I do think that we can sometimes over romanticize Alan Roden a little bit, just because we hate all of the guys blocking his playing time so much. But we need to get serious. I am already tired of this "we're going to win" facade the Twins are putting up. If we're going to be bad, let's just be bad and have fun doing it.
Yeah, I'll also say, like, the criticism with Alan Roden is the same criticism as Austin Martin. And Austin Martin's on this roster to play the 1/3 of the time against he's only playing against left-handed pitching. If you put Alan Roden on this roster, he could do the same thing, but against right-handed pitching, be a more effective platoon partner. He could also lead off. He'd be in the exact same role as Austin Martin. You'd have two guys filling one spot, playing solid defense, and getting on base and running a little bit at the top of the order. That's fine. It's an effective use of your leadoff spot. If you look at even the most pessimistic of the seven different projection systems on Fangraphs, that most pessimistic option still has Alan Roden as a 318 on base. That's better than I think you'd expect for sure Kody Clemens and maybe even Trevor Larnach. And then you also factor in that he's probably a guy that you can count on to steal some bags and play quality defense. It feels like a no-brainer. And I get that this Twins team historically has, tried to hold on to options. They say, we need depth. We need to keep this guy around. He's a big league player and he doesn't have options, and this other guy does. So we're going to send down the other guy. We're going to keep him. That's why Kody Clemens is on this roster. That's why Trevor Larnach is on this roster. That's why James Outman is on this roster. But what is the value of keeping a guy like Clemens or Outman around? Outman, I think, was close to being DFA'd by the Dodgers. Clemens did get DFA'd, and the Twins traded minimal cash considerations for him. Like, these are replaceable, fungible, replacement level big leaguers, and the Twins are valuing keeping random guys around over playing the guys that they traded major assets for. Like, that just makes no sense.
I do want to circle the wagon back around a bit, get us a little bit back on to the actual on field results we've seen so far. And I think one thing that we've just kind of been tossing out that we haven't touched on a ton, that should be touched on more, is the value of the added base running that Alan Roden brings, because we have seen some mistakes. Like, we already went over the Josh Bell base running issue, especially watching Byron Buxton simply overrun second base and get caught off guard was appalling. Austin Martin got picked off today. But the Twins have also been more aggressive. They have been running more, and it's been working out well for them. It was Royce Lewis, I think, on Sunday, who It was just a single, a stolen base, and another single. Bam, there's a run in what ended up being a 2-run game. Like, I appreciate that if Derek Shelton's doing anything differently, at the very least he's running, because you're gonna get more good than bad from it. I think in previous rosters we've been older and slower, and I don't think that Rocco Baldelli's take on being one of the most selective space stealing teams in the league was terrible then. But this is a different team with different talents and different age, and I like that Derek Shelton's getting aggressive, because that's the exact type of voodoo slapdick putting together a run that we're going to need out of the offense this year, and anywhere we can get that from is going to be a bonus.
Yeah, I will say I don't think it was like Rocco's preference this team didn't run. I think it was really just the roster construction. As you said, this has been one of the older, slower, least athletic rosters. We've seen that not only in their base running, but also in the defense. This has been a really bad defensive team for years. It just seems like they're trying to slug their way to being a competent position player group, and they haven't slugged, so it just hasn't worked. And I think that's another thing that I think you bring up a good point with Alan Roden. Is he does introduce some more athleticism, some youth to this lineup. He brings another element on the bases. He can play good defense. It's the same thing that we're excited about, with eventually Emmanuel Rodriguez and Walker Jenkins. Same thing with Kalen Culpepper. It's the same reason that Luke Keeschel was such a breath of fresh air last year. He comes in, he swipes bags, he gets on base, he does exciting things. And I think this roster just needs more of that. What this roster doesn't need is more guys in the Kody Clemens and Trevor Larnach skill set. And I'm not saying that a lumbering, slugging, left-handed bat doesn't have its place. I'm one of the biggest Matt Wallner fans that you're going to find. I think he's a middle of the order bat and an excellent piece of this team. But you can only have so many of those guys. And if you're deficient in a bunch of other areas, the one area that you're good at has to be really good. And Matt Wallner has met that threshold. He's been a good enough hitter to where it makes up for the rest of the skill set, and he's an above average regular. There's no evidence at all that Trevor Larnach or Kody Clemens can do the same thing. And so you might as well see if, Alan Roden or any of the other options they have can bring not only a more well-rounded skill set, but just a better overall package.
Yeah. I have two things on that I like. The first one, while I'm not saying it's gonna happen, they did talk a lot on the broadcast on opening day about how the Twins' messaging has been that everybody's gonna run, everybody's gonna be more athletic, everybody's gonna be more active on the base path, and they even said that Josh Bell could get a green light sometimes. Now there's two parts to this. One, it's not like he's fast, but we did just see Josh Naylor steal 30 bases for the Mariners last year. I'm not saying that Josh Bell is going to sniff that number, but I am going to be eagerly watching every single time, every single day that Josh Bell is on the base path, because that would be a season bucket list item if we're going to be realistic. Can't put all the normal bucket list items, like having all stars, seeing a guy in the home run derby, winning records, any of that. So if I could see Josh Bell steal a base this year, that would really make my season. I think they said the last time he stole a base was in 2021, and that might even be too recent for him. But what is good about this is, as you mentioned, this is what we have down in AAA. If you guys are ever getting tired of watching these Twins, they're frustrating, they're downtrodden, you just hate them, go take a breather, watch a Saints game. You're going to be completely revitalized, because that is the direction that this franchise is heading. And I think it could be there as recently as the second half of the season. So I like that Derek Shelton is already trying to set a mindset and a tone of being aggressive, assertive, and alert on the base paths, because we're going to be cashing in on those skills really soon.
Yeah, I think while we're still on the position player side, I also want to note that Brooks Lee looks like the exact same player that he was a year ago, and that is not good, because he has shown still a lot of big limitations moving laterally at shortstop. There's been a couple of balls throughout this first 4 games where I think a normal shortstop gets to, and Brooks Lee did not come close to. I think there's going to be a lot of value when Kalen Culpepper comes up, and just defensively, not having Brooks Lee at shortstop. I think it's been pretty bad so far, and he doesn't do anything to make up for it offensively. He's still continuing to just swing at garbage below the zone. There's no reason to ever throw Brooks Lee a fastball. You can throw him a bunch of curveballs in the dirt, and he'll probably swing at three of them, and maybe he weekly taps one to second base. And a couple games a week, he'll roll one through the infield somewhere, and he'll hit 230 and have no power. And even when he hits a ball in the gap, he can't leg it out for a double because he's pretty slow. And so if you can cut it off quickly, there's no shot. Like, I just don't like Brooks Lee's skill set. I don't think it's one that warrants a lot of faith in either his offensive or defensive abilities. And it's just so underwhelming.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of very passionate complaining about a lot of guys on the pod already today and this entire podcast. We haven't talked a lot about Brooks Lee, and I think there's a good reason for that. It's over. It's never been more over for any Twin I've ever watched. He's batting ninth in the lineup, just picked up his first hit on the season today. He's now one for, I want to say, like 11 or 12, then probably. You're right. He has looked poor defensively. He really is not adding anything to this roster. He hasn't for a while. And I will say it was a little funny. I think it was like 2, 3 days before opening day. We had a little bit of a jump scare because MLB.com had not listed the Kalen Culpepper transaction when he got sent back down to the minors. And so there's like 15 minutes where me and Matt discovered this, and we believed that the Twins were going to shock everybody by having Kalen Culpepper start the opening day roster. And I'm like, wow, this must mean the Twins are really, really out on Brooks Lee. And obviously, we missed that transaction. He was in the minors. That didn't happen. But I'm starting to think that was less of a mistake and more of just a premonition because this is another guy that the Twins just cannot put up with for much longer.
Yeah, I mean, we're already like it's tempting to be like, well, Brooks Lee was a first round pick and he's only 25. He's going to be good, and he played well in the minors, so we can have some faith that he'll bounce back. But then you look at his numbers so far in the majors, and it is terrible. In a 50 game sample in 2024, he had a 61 WRC plus. He was 39% below league average. He put up a truly putrid, was that a 585 OPS? Just awful. Worth negative -0.3 WAR. He's a sub replacement level player. And then last year, he played 139 games, so pretty much a full season. And he put up a 655 OPS, good for an 81 WRC plus. That's 19% below league average, and he was worth 0.3 WAR. Not what you want to see for a guy starting every day. And I mean, this isn't even counting today's game, but through 3 games, he was worth negative -0.2 WAR for the Twins. And even by the most optimistic projection system on Fangraphs, he will only be worth 1.5 WAR the rest of the year. And that's with a really good defensive projection, which I do not believe in, and a really heavy positional weight towards him being the everyday shortstop. But even that projection system, which is weirdly bullish on him, has been only a 93 WRC plus, so still below league average, and only a 302 on base percentage. So I think there's very little that we can point to and say Brooks Lee does this well. And I think it's only a matter of time before he loses the starting shortstop spot to Kalen Culpepper. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets demoted to the minors because it's clearly not working in the big leagues. And I don't think rolling him out there every day is going to help anything.
I've been sitting here trying to come up with some Brooks Lee comps, and I'm really struggling. The two best comps I have right now is like a post Chicago Javier Baez, just a little too slow defensively, swinging at everything. But even I think Baez he still carried some value. I mean, he was an All Star last year, fell off a bit. He hasn't posted more than 2 WAR. Well, I guess he did it once with the Tigers in 22, but what I really go back to is Brooks Lee is like your my player, my career on MLB The Show when you're just starting out, before you've gotten to juice all your stats, and you're like a good enough player to be crushing the crap out of high school ball, but you don't have any of the actual stats. So once you actually start playing competition, you just go up. You don't know how to play defense. You're a bad base runner because you don't get good reads and you're slow, and you just can't hit anything because you aren't actually a baseball. In our case, it's because we're not actually baseball players. Our plate discipline is atrocious and we swing at everything. Brooks Lee does all the same things. He just is a baseball player somehow.
Yeah, I think the comp that I had for Brooks Lee that I brought up to you earlier today is he's a lot like Marcelo Meyer. Meyer's obviously behind him, but Eric's giving me a thumbs down. But I think it's similar where it's a couple of guys who, are thought of as polished hitters and that they hit for a high average. They don't strike out all that much, but they also don't get to impact power. And I just don't have a whole lot of faith in the overall skill set. But if we're talking about guys who have played, in the big leagues ahead of Brooks Lee, I will say he's a lot like Nick York. And again, you know, this is 30 seconds worth of research and my own recollection of these guys as prospects. But Nick York was a guy who hit for a high average in the minors with the Red Sox. He, didn't hit for a ton of power. He's kind of a smaller guy, but he was a shortstop who had to move off of shortstop because he wasn't a good enough defender. He played second base. He hit some homers, but like once he got to the big leagues, he wasn't getting to enough power, and the bat to ball skills kind of fell apart. And he didn't do a whole lot offensively. He's still sticking around currently with the Pirates, but his projections look pretty much the same as Brooks Lee, projected for roughly an 85 WRC plus and about a 310 on base as a backup middle infielder. And if you're saying who's Nick York, I've never heard of this guy. Surely he wasn't as good of a prospect as Brooks Lee. In 2022, Nick York was the number 33 prospect in baseball on Fangraphs. And so he was every bit the same prospect that Brooks Lee was. And Nick York, if I'm remembering correctly, yes, was a first round pick by the Red Sox, 17th overall. And so take that as you will, but there's definitely precedence for guys like this not working in the big leagues. And I don't know how much longer the Twins can keep on with Lee. And I will say, it's not just us reacting to a 4-game sample size this season. It's really 190 games of the last 3 seasons, and we're just seeing this trend start to repeat itself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason we brought in Oswaldo Arcia, not Oswaldo, Orlando. Right?
Orlando.
Yep.
Yeah, Orlando.
Crazy that we went the entire spring training without mixing that up, and now that we're actually into the season and he's in AAA, I finally slipped up. There's a reason we brought Orlando in. There's a reason we brought Vidal Brujan in. I get we didn't really take a real stab at it, which I guess would signal that the Twins didn't see it as their most pressing need, but the Twins have been aware that they need something else at shortstop. It's why Tristan Gray, I think that's why Tristan Gray made the roster personally, because if the Twins wanted just defense above all else and were willing to sacrifice the shortstop position, they would have gone with Ryan Kreidler. I think they have Tristan Gray up because they at least somewhat believe in the bat. Whether or not that's unfounded or not, clearly, I think it's another signal that the Twins are very much out on Brooks Lee's bat. And if they're out on his bat, there's not a whole lot saving him from him just being out altogether.
Yeah, I will say there are some reasons to believe in Tristan Gray. He swings the heck out of the bat. He really swings the bat hard. He hits the ball hard. Last year in Tampa, he had only a 298 weighted on base average, but he had a 349 expected weighted on base average. So he was getting a little bit unlucky at the plate. He had a low BABIP. But I think the big news for Gray is that he cut his strikeout rate all the way down to 22% last year, which is pretty manageable. And for a guy who has had 30 homer seasons in AAA, both in 2022 and 2023, he's a guy who can play a decent enough shortstop. There's some reasons to believe in the bat at least being we talked about how Kody Clemens doesn't do a whole lot besides hit home runs. Tristan Gray could potentially be a Kody Clemens style of player, a guy that has a pretty empty 20 homer season, but he can play a viable defensive shortstop, and that's infinitely more valuable than a guy like Kody Clemens or current state Brooks Lee. And so it would be pretty crappy to end up having Tristan Gray playing pretty regularly in the infield, but honestly, I'm not convinced that that would be any worse than Brooks Lee right now.
Yeah, I think it ends up being a wash because if we're being real with ourselves, it's probably just Culpepper's job to start 2027. So, unless you're that worried about the 2026 outcome, I don't think that Tristan Gray or whatever impact he does or doesn't end up having on the season is that big. I guess the one argument you can make, if you want to make it, is at least he's getting his shot. I do like to see guys who have historically performed well or shown signs of improvement getting the chance to actually show it on the field. So this is the exact type of season that we should be going after that. Do I really think those changes are going to be significant enough to change his profile as a hitter overall? No, but at least they're doing something, I guess.
Yeah. Also, of note, Kalen Culpepper is already projected to be a better player than Brooks Lee this season, having never played in Major League Baseball and having a total of 3 games of experience at AAA.
And
Uh,
having no idea when he's going to actually debut.
yeah, that's true. So, yeah, I mean, that really just speaks more to how low the projection systems are on Brooks Lee, and I think for good reason. But I think of all of the Twins prospects in AAA, obviously we'd expect Roden to get a call pretty early, especially in case of an injury. We would expect kind of the same for Emmanuel Rodriguez. But I think Kalen Culpepper could be a sneaky quick call up. Yes, he has a really limited minor league sample size, but he's done nothing but hit in the minors. He's really resolved a lot of the questions that we had about the glove. And honestly, he's just at a position of need. And we've seen the Twins call guys up on a similar timeline before when they just need them. That's what they did with Royce Lewis in, I think, 2021. It's what they did with Luke Keeschel last year. And so I think, it's not unreasonable to think that Kalen Culpepper is not very far away from the big leagues.
Not at all. And it is like we said from the beginning, it's a little disheartening that what we're talking about now is still a lot of the same of what we talked about this offseason, a lot of what we expected to be a problem during the season, but nothing has changed. We do still have a lot of reinforcements coming, most of them likely in the second half. So I guess what I want to ask is if we're going to dig in a little bit and accept that we're getting there, but for a while we at least have to roll out this roster and we're going to have to watch it and find something to enjoy about it. What are you looking to enjoy for the first half of this season, Matt?
Definitely the starting pitching. I think that's the thing that all offseason we've had high hopes for, and definitely the area of the roster that's changed the most over the last 6 to 9 months. And so watching guys like Mick Abel and Taj Bradley throw consistently, I'm very excited for. Those are both guys that I have high hopes for, and that looked, especially in the case of Taj Bradley, looked really good in their first outing. So that's definitely going to be the area that I'm keeping an eye on.
I like that. I'm not going to move too far away. We touched on it the most at the start of the episode, but this bullpen has, through 4 games, at least been better than we thought they would be or hoped they would be. And more than anything, this is where we have the least depth in the entire organization, I would argue, at this point. So these guys are going to get long tryouts. And while I don't expect anything to really come from it, we've seen a lot of Twins relievers come from relative anonymity to become big names. And that's, I think, what I'm going to be looking for and following the most in the first half. If we could even find one genuinely middle to high leverage reliever out of everybody in this bullpen right now, I would be really happy with that.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the hope. The Twins have so many openings in the bullpen that I think they're just going to end up cycling a bunch of guys and seeing what sticks. I think one thing that's interesting is that we haven't seen. Let me double check this.
I don't think we've
Yeah,
seen
we have yet
Royerson
to
or Kent,
see.
have we?
Correct. And I think Lawyerson, yeah, he was definitely the last guy in the bullpen. I'm not super surprised we haven't seen him yet, but I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen Zach Kent. He had a good spring. He's a guy that, a lot of teams were interested in. He bounced around the waiver wire, and he has some reasons to believe in him, and he's a guy that the Twins prioritized getting on the roster. And I think it's interesting that we have not seen him at all yet.
We do also have to consider, though, that of the 4 games we played, one of them was, I think, entirely covered by Bailey Ober and Mick Abel. There might have been a pitcher in the 9th there.
Yeah, Anthony Bonda threw 2/3 of an inning.
That's what it was. But this is still 4 games in. While there is reason to believe more in Zach Kent than not anybody else, reason to believe in Zach Kent than Cody Lawyerson, at least at the end of the day. These were still the last 2 additions to the bullpen, and I don't mind the Twins riding out the heavier or theoretically higher upside portion of their bullpen, which is what they seem to be doing so far, because I would rather see Cody Funderburk and Anthony Banda each throw 40 innings in the first half, and then Zach Kent and Cody Lawyerson only throw 10, than to have all of them throw 25 or whatever that would average out to.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, looking ahead, and this is way ahead, I do think we're going to see a lot of change in this roster. We talked about this, in our last episode, and honestly, throughout most of spring training. I think the roster that we're really frustrated with, and it's tough to watch currently, is not the roster that we're going to see going forward. But I think it's going to be a tough month or two while we wait for that transition to the roster that we're going to expect to see for the next couple years. And honestly, like, I have very little faith in this team being good enough to add at the deadline, and I think we're very much trending towards subtracting. Again, it's only 4 games, but I think this just really underscores the concerns we already had about the lineup. And I think we're in for, another unfortunately eventful year where we probably see guys coming and going, and this roster look a whole lot different by the end of the season.
Yeah, I can't really offer any different diagnosis through 4 games. What I will say is it's a little weird to me that we had 2 days off in the first 6 total days of the season, but we're about to find out real quick, because right after our off day on Tuesday, we settle in with 15 straight to open the entire first half of April. And then we have another weird 2 days off in a 4-day stretch, and then we run another 13 games right after that. So it's gonna fly by in the blink of an eye. At least we hope and pray, because it feels like it does every year, and we need it to this year more than any other. But we do play a lot of games, as we always do, and I think while we're preaching about not trying to overreact to 4 games, by 1 month in, we will already have a very, very good read on this Minnesota Twins team.
Yeah, anytime a team is coming into a season with as low of playoff odds as the Twins, the margin for error is so small that one bad month really can sink you. And so, like Eric said, by the end of the month, the Twins could legitimately be out of the playoff race. And I think that's sad to say, but I think there's it really underscores the importance of each game early in the year. It makes losses like today's loss or yesterday's loss, when they were just very sloppy and kind of threw away a very winnable game, it makes those hurt even more. But I will say, even with a 1-3 start to the season, the Twins have pretty much identical playoff odds to the start of the year. They still have about a 24% chance to make the playoffs. And so, as doom and gloom as this podcast has been, I think there's still reasons for optimism. We talked about the young guys who are on the way. There's a lot of fun players we expect to debut this season, a lot of guys we expect to be part of the long-term plan. And so there's still plenty of reasons to watch the Twins. There's still plenty of reason to follow the Twins, to listen to us talk about the Twins, to care about the Twins. But I think the odds of that culminating into a winning or playoff bound season are probably pretty low, as they've been all along.
Yeah, I will say my funny of the week, what I laughed the most at out of the Twins is the Athletic, who ran their MLB fan survey at the start of every year as they do and released the results a few days ago. Most notably, they have their Hopo meter, something they've done every year since they started this survey. And for, I believe, the first time since the survey started, ranking dead last, 30 out of 30 teams, an astounding 4.6% of writers, or not writers, readers found it in themselves to be somehow excited about the Twins. 4.6% was by far, well, not by far the lowest, because the Angels also are terrible and have no hope ever. But us and the Angels were by far and away the least hopeful fan bases entering the season. So, well, I do sometimes feel bad about all the doom and the gloom, and trust me, we would both love to turn that around. This is very rationally rooted, and at least we're all on the same page that we've all dug in for a year of baseball.
Yeah, it's unlikely to be great, but we'll be here nonetheless. It's not like any of us can quit it. Also, I'll say, like, the Twins look like a way worse roster than they've been for the past few years. But if you look at, the projected roster compared to some teams around the league, I think it's a lot of the doom and gloom comes from the fact that we've subtracted and we've slashed payroll, and this team doesn't look as good as we've seen in past years. But it's still not a terrible team. We're kind of in the lower end of that wild card contender tier, where if a few things break right, the Twins could be back into the mix. Right now, our projected rest of season WAR total is right around the Giants, the Diamondbacks, the Pirates, the Reds, the Athletics. A lot of these teams aren't perennial contenders by any means, but there's reasons for optimism, and they're pretty solid teams. And I will say, by rest of season WAR, the Twins are only 1.6 WAR behind the Astros, who are very much a contender and a team that we would expect to be in the playoff mix for the entire season. And that 1.6 WAR is Pablo Lopez not getting hurt, or bring in one more bat to help this offense. Like, they're not that far away. We could have a prospect breakout early season that changes the trajectory of this lineup, that then puts us into an interesting range. And I will say, like, that can happen. That happened with Keishel. That's happened for many teams in many other years, and that's definitely within the realm of possibilities. But if we're talking about things that are likely to happen, probably not.
Well, we may not be counting on the Twins being any good anytime soon, but we are at the end of yet another episode, which means you can, of course, count on our monologue minute. Matt, start us off.
Man, I feel like I've monologued a couple times in this episode, namely about Trevor Larnach and his fit on this roster. But overall, like, I just want to say I'm excited about this. I mean, not this team in particular, but I'm excited about baseball being back. It's kind of the same thing I said last week, but it has been really nice over the last few days to just every day, tune into a Twins game. Even if I'm at work or I'm doing something else and I can only, listen to it on the radio for a couple innings or check the score box, in between meetings, it is something to track, something to, keep me entertained on a day to day basis. And I think that's been a lot of fun. And I will continue to, enjoy watching this team or get really frustrated by this team or go on long, drawn out rants about how much I don't like what this team is doing. But having something to follow and be passionate about for 6 months a year, I think, is a really cool thing. And so excited for another year of Twins baseball.
I love to hear that. I hit the same thing earlier today. I was in a job interview and they're, just a casual, how are you doing? I'm like, honestly, baseball is back. I have been really happy for the past week, no matter what is actually happening. So I think we're all very much into that mood. I was on a very similar mindset for my monologue minute, but I want to give a very specific shout out. I was very unhappy when Dick Bramer was unceremoniously retired, forced into retirement by the Minnesota Twins. But Corey Provis has done such a great job filling in for Dick Bramer, taking over his role. And I want to shout out the entire crew so far this year in general because let's be real, being a baseball broadcaster is tough. There is a lot, not only a lot of total runtime compared to other games, a lot of dead time where nothing is actually happening in the game and you just have to fill it. And that is only doubled when you're player talking about a really terrible team like the Twins. So there's going to be a lot of games this year, I reckon, where we're going to have a lot of those really long, winding, seemingly unimportant and irrelevant stories and conversations out of the booth. And I'm really looking forward to that. I've already loved what we've been seeing out of the Twins booth this year. Obviously, they talked for like 3 innings about the idea of Derek Shelton telling Josh Bell to try and steal a base. They gave some great insight. I thought it was hilarious. They the other day, I think this was Sunday's game, were ragging on the metrics a bit because they had one of those generic infographics and it said Byron Buxton last year was like 96th percentile in batting value, 92nd percentile in running value, but then somehow only 66th percentile in fielding value. And then he went out there and immediately made back-to-back dazzling defensive plays, and they were making sure to make some fun of some of those metrics. Not that they're wrong, but it certainly has been just fun. I think what it is it's familiar, and I'm glad that it already feels familiar. I think that the Twins have nailed it with Marneau and Perkins as secondary play-by-play announcers to go with Corey Provis. The entire group just feels very comfortable. And even though I didn't spend 20 years growing up listening to them like I did Dick Bramer, I can start to feel that same comfort I did hearing Dick Bramer call a baseball game.
Yeah, I'm a longtime Corey Provis fan. You know, he's been great on the radio for years, and I'm really excited to see him in a TV role. I think he was great in it last year. He's continuing to excel in it, and I really like the dynamic that both Perkins and Morneau bring as not only like former players, but really smart, cerebral, like modern day players. I love when they'll be getting into, the pitch by pitch specifics in that bat, and both Morneau and Perkins will start to, talk about what they would throw in this spot, what they're looking for as a hitter, what's the feel that they're looking for on this pitch as a pitcher, what are some things that they would be thinking about in this game situation. I think, obviously not nearly to this extent, but as someone who's, grown up playing baseball and has, thought about baseball in a really competitive mindset for a lot of my life, it's very interesting to hear guys who have done it at a way higher level talk about how they view the game and how they experience it. Because even if it's not entirely relatable, it's just super cool to see like guys I've grown up cheering for and idolizing, talk about their experience and how they view the game and how I can use that to, color my own view of the game. And that's really what color commentary is all about. And so I think it's been awesome.
We love that. I do appreciate that they went to the 3 broadcaster model. I know not a lot of teams do that, but Gary, Keith, and Ron are some of my absolute non-Twins favorites. And I think Glenn Perkins and Justin Marneau are very well versed in their specific halves of the game. So to put that together really kind of gives you a full baseball mind. I think my favorite little nugget from them through the first 4 games was Sunday's game again when we had Buxton up with the bases loaded in the 8th, and they brought in Yenier Cano just to face him because he threw like 8 straight sinkers. And then Marneau and Perkins were arguing about, can you go away from the sinker? Do you have to keep throwing it? And Perkins was giving his view. And then Marneau was like, well, here's what I'm thinking as a hitter. Here's why I'd be sitting on anything else. And you've got to ride with the sinker. And Perkins just kind of admitted defeat. He's like, yep, and that's why I never picked up a baseball bat, and you are an MVP. Just kind of seeing that back and forth banter and the easygoingness in them is really fun.
Yeah. So, even if we just view the Twins as, one big podcast that happens to have, some baseball being played alongside of it, it's still interesting. And hopefully the quality of that baseball will be, not only better than last year, but hopefully give us some, hope and faith in the future that we can actually have a winning product on the field. And I think there's again, like a lot to look forward to this year. And regardless of how it goes, super exciting.
Absolutely. And when we do get there, because I do believe we'll have some exciting moments of the season, you can be sure that you're going to hear it on the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We'll be here all season. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts: YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, I believe even. As always, we're on Twitter. We have our Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We're also both active individually. Definitely spitting a lot more of our in-game thoughts out on Twitter. So if you can't get enough of us, see a doctor and then go find us on Twitter during the game.
Yeah, we will keep seeing you all on Twitter. We'll keep tweeting out. If you want to hear, mid-game updates, you can always look there. But otherwise, we'll see you all next week, and we're looking forward to a great season.